Lastly, I just want to make sure you know that next week it's gonna be an AMA with the chaplains from the Center for Lay Chaplaincy and Prison Restorative Justice. So you can come and ask us anything about lay chaplaincy, about a certified unit, about lay CPE, both level 1 and level 2. Whatever you want to ask, you can ask. We're going to have lay chaplains with us who can talk about that. So I want to encourage you to be here and bring anybody who might be interested in chaplaincy and talking about it. And if you have people in the ordination process that feel a little timid to ask questions other places, this might be a great place to ask too. All right. So I want to get down to business. We have 2 port chaplains with us tonight from the Seattle Seafarers Center. And I, in the short time I've talked to them, have learned a whole lot of what I don't even know about in terms of port chaplaincy, which has been fascinating to me, that there's an international network. So the Seattle Seafarers Center is an affiliate of the Mission to Seafarers and Stella Maris. That's as much as I know about any of that. So you can ask them how all that works. So Julia Cooper is the director of operations. She's a layperson. I want to call her chaplain. She's a little reluctant to have me do that, but that's okay. She's from Rhode Island, and she worked in tech before she came out to the left coast to learn about nonprofits. She boards ships and tends to cruise. So she does a lot of the work up there in Seattle. And for all of us Episcopalians, you'll be happy to learn, or not, that she did a year in the Episcopal Service Corps. And then Deacon Joey DeLeon is originally from Manila in the Philippines. He's a Roman Catholic deacon, and he has been working with the Seattle Seafarers Center for 5 years. So we are so pleased to have you guys. Gabe, if you want to spotlight them, great. And we're going to let them, I think, Julia, you're going to go first, and then Deacon Joey, and then we're going to open it up for questions like we usually do. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having us, Jana. So my name is Julia, and I've been working at the Seattle Seafarers Center for close to 2 years. I did not know much at all about seafaring or port chaplaincy before I started here, but I've learned a lot since then. So I'll give you a brief description of what we do here, and then Deacon Joey will talk more about port chaplaincy in general. So we are part of a couple international networks of seafarer ministries. And so our mission is to serve the international crew members, mainly of cargo ships that are coming into the port of Seattle, as well as cruise ships. And we are part of a larger team of chaplains across the United States and the world who are doing similar things in other large ports. So the port of Seattle and Tacoma is the 4th or 5th largest port in the US. And so we get a lot of ship traffic. On any given day, there might be from maybe 2 to 7 or 8 ships in the port of Seattle. And so our goal is to visit every ship that comes into the port, and we visit the ships, we climb onto the ships and check in with the crew and see what they need. The average container ship or bulk carrier ship has a crew of 20 to 30 people. Most of the crews that come into Seattle are international. And so one of the main places that crew members are from is the Philippines. There's also a lot of crew members from India, China, Indonesia, lots of places in Eastern Europe like Ukraine, Montenegro, and various other countries as well. And so we board the ships, and we're a resource for them in whatever they need. We check in on their well-being. We provide a lot of practical services to them. So sometimes they ask us to give them a ride into town, either to do some sightseeing or some shopping while they're in the port. Sometimes we'll go on shopping errands for the crew because they're not allowed to leave, whether it's because they don't have a valid US visa or they don't have enough time to get off the ship because things are so busy. Or during the first couple of years of COVID, most crews were not allowed to leave the ship at all. So we did a lot of shopping for them. We also provide communication resources. So we bring a lot of SIM cards on board and provide those to the crew so they can contact friends and family back home while they're in the US. And occasionally we will also provide religious services on request by the crews or the captain. So sometimes we'll lead a mass. We have a tradition of providing ashes on Ash Wednesday to the ships in port who are interested in that. Occasionally we get requests to lead a memorial service when a seafarer has died on a ship that's coming into the port of Seattle or nearby ports. And then we also provide various religious materials to the crew. A lot of, especially the Filipino crew members, are often Catholic. And so we have rosaries that we provide and different daily readings. We have Bibles as well. And we mostly provide those as requested. Our goal is not to proselytize to anyone, but we're a resource, and we're here to talk to the crew as well if they want to talk about God or any spiritual topic, or just to check in on how they're doing and their well-being, how their family is, how they're doing at sea. Most of the crew members are on a contract of 6 to 9 months, and so they're away from home for a long time, and it's a really hard job and hard to stay in touch with their family. So we try to look out for their mental health and their spiritual health and provide lots of practical services that they need. So Joey can talk more about the port chaplaincy side of things.
Thank you, Julia. Well, chaplaincy, as you very well know, is a calling. And 5 years ago, I didn't realize that I'll be in this situation, because my ministry after ordination was mostly in the hospital. But because the chaplain, the Catholic chaplain, Port Chaplain, retired at the age of 87, they were looking for somebody to replace him and do the chaplaincy for the Port of Seattle. And I was initially and slowly brought into this chaplaincy by being made a member of the board of the Catholic Seamen's Club back then, before it incorporated with or integrated with the Seamen's Center. We are now an ecumenical Seamen's Club, Seafarers Club, composed of Episcopalian, Catholic, and Lutheran faiths. And as Jules was saying, we passionately care for our seafarers that come to our ports. So in every ship that comes to our port, we make every effort to visit them. As chaplains, we have to be visible to them. We don't really encourage that we meet with them virtually, so to speak. So even during the pandemic, we make the effort to come up to ships and be visible to them and be present to them. Because chaplaincy for us is being present to the people that we serve. And therefore, we have to make ourselves available to them, especially when there's a need that arises in their situation. And each situation is different. Therefore, we have to be adaptable to the situation that we're faced. And that's how we serve the seafarers that come to our ports. As I've said, we are ecumenical, and therefore, in our work, we always remember that we are serving all people of different faiths, and we have to be sensitive and respectful of the differences. I'm a Catholic deacon, I think I was brought in here to serve the seafarers who are Catholics, mostly Filipinos, because I'm a Filipino. And 60% of the crew that comes to our ports are Filipinos. You know, the Philippines is the largest supplier of seamen in the world. Out of the 1.89 seafarers in the world, 400,000 of them are Filipinos. So as you can tell, there's a great number of Filipinos on board the ships. So when we are called upon or when we visit, we need to learn how the seafarers are doing in the 9 months, 6 to 9 month contracts that they are on board the ships, whether they are lonely, they are homesick, they are depressed, their mental state. So we do this usually in a subtle way by asking questions, how they're doing in their work, how they're communicating with their families. We need to know the situations that affect them, their emotional being, their mental condition. We need to be familiar with the environment that they are in, the kind of work that they do in the ships, how fatigued they are in their work that can cause mental depression or homesickness. And at the same time, we also try to look at their spiritual faith, how they are living their faith aboard the ships. So in all of this, we just have to trust God and live by faith, so to speak, because we know as chaplains that God is working through us to enable us to reach out to them, whatever faith they might have. So we are there to meet them where they are, whatever faith they belong to, whatever country they come from. So we have to make sure that we respect their situation and help them in whatever capacity we have to help them in their need.
Deacon Joy, I'm sorry to interject, but we have a couple of questions brought up from what you were talking about.
Okay.
Can you say a little bit about what religious traditions you most commonly encounter? That's question one. And then I am curious, you say that you need to be adaptable, and I would be curious to know, like, what kinds of adaptations do you have to make, and sort of like, what is the most interesting thing you've been asked to do on a ship?
Okay, to answer your first question, most of the faiths that we encounter are, again, Filipinos are mostly Catholics, and some of them are Protestants. We also encounter Hindus from the Indian faith, and people with no faith, the Chinese crew from the People's Republic of China. So Indonesians, mostly Muslims, are there also present. And to answer your second question, being adaptable means, as I spoke about their individual situations, we need to know what their needs are and have to be able to react to what is brought in front of us. For example, they may have a problem of sending money to their loved ones. And we just had one situation that was really causing us some challenges. A crew member sent money to to Indonesia through MoneyGram, but $700 worth, and it did not go through. And so we had to find out how we can help this person. First of all, get the $700 back. After we have called MoneyGram, what we have to do, they said, oh, you have to go to a store that has MoneyGram, try to refund the money of $700, and then send it again to the recipient. Come to find out, looking at searching it in the internet, how we could do about this, the best thing is to go to a Walmart, which we thought would be the easiest thing to do because they're a bigger outfit. So we went to Walmart, and come to find out, they require a passport of the crew. And of course, when they come out, they have to show an ID. What they don't know, what Walmart does not know, is that crew are not allowed to carry their regular passport. They can have a copy of it, but cannot carry the actual passport. So when we showed the actual the copy of the regular passport, they said, we don't accept copies. So we cannot process what you're asking us to do. You may want to try CVS pharmacy. They are also a MoneyGram company. So we were called all the CVS, and they said, oh, we have only a $200 limit for refunds, and you have to call the bigger CVS. So we were going through all of this. So what I'm trying to say here, you really have to adapt to a situation that you are faced with. You have to be ready to provide, things that you might know at first, but you must be able to see the things that will help you resolve the issue. But at the end, we were not able to help the person, even though we were able to identify a CVS pharmacy that can receive $700. The reference number that was given to us was not working, and the crew member has to be on board by 4 o'clock, and it was 3 o'clock. And
yeah.
So
it sounds like
kind of situations.
It sounds like you have to work with circumstances of that someone who's inside the system of the U.S. doesn't ever encounter, but you're working with people who are outside that don't have the privileges and some of the rights. And so you get these very complex problems that arise. And you have to sort of help them navigate this. I asked you this question when we met before in the session. Well, not today, but several weeks ago. I asked both Deacon Joey and Julia, okay, so help me understand. You drive to the port, you park your car, you get out of the car, and then what happens next? Like, what does a port chaplain do? Like, what happens next?
Well, first and foremost, you have to be really have a good relationship with the security of the port, because they can make or break your mission, especially if you're not carrying the right credentials, or when you're bringing in some people who don't have the right credentials. Would you be able to take them with you? But having done that, a security person would drive you to the ship next to the gangway, so you can go up the gangway and then meet with a watch guard on top of the gangway, and there you have other challenges. They call in that you're on board, and they call it into their officer. We have people from the Seamen's Club. Is it okay for you to meet with them? So in some cases, you're rejected. You're told they're busy, come back later, or, oh, we don't need your services, things like that. So you just have to adapt yourself to those kinds of situations.
So I'm wondering, so if you get on board, what commonly, like, how do you meet with the crew and where do you meet with them? And
oftentimes, you're taken to the ship's office where you meet a second officer or the officer in duty, or you meet the chief mate, and you present all your materials that you brought with you that you think might help crew members, like, reading materials, rosaries, and Bibles, and ITF documents. And then the officer might say, have you had lunch yet? No, not really. Do you want to have lunch with the crew? Oh, sure. So we get to have lunch with the crew, and that's the time we are able to talk with the crew. Well, even if we're not given lunch, they do send us to the crew mess to meet with whoever is in the crew mess. And that's the time when we are able to talk with them, whether in confidence, one-on-one, or as a group. So
one question that came up is, and this is to both of you, of course, but you're talking about international crews where there people come from a variety of countries and speak a bunch of languages. Is language often a problem or a challenge that you face communicating with crews? And if so, how do you overcome that challenge?
Most of the time, the official language of the ship is English. So most of the people would know how to speak English. And if they don't, then you deal with being adaptable, sign languages, or you point at things,
Right.
So in broken English, you are able to communicate with them. And this is particularly true from the crew of People's Republic of China, in which they don't speak English that well.
It sounds like it requires, I'm just thinking about my hospital chaplaincy, and it requires a kind of willingness to be vulnerable, to pantomime meaning, and to sit on a bunch of awkwardness. It's very awkward, right, when you're trying to communicate with someone and you don't have a shared language. Is that, and I'm wondering too, well, a question came in, do you work in pairs or do you go alone?
Julia, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah. We try to go in groups or pairs if we can. Sometimes we go alone. Usually it's nice to have a pair because, different people have different gifts and different ways they can connect with the crew. I might be on a ship with one of my colleagues and the crew is asking about the Seattle Supersonics basketball team, which I know nothing about. And it's useful to have someone who actually follows sports to, engage with them in that way. And then we also have different services we provide. So it's useful to have multiple people who can work with the crew, whether there's one person who's troubleshooting, setting up a lot of SIM cards, and another person who is, more conversing with the crew and asking how they're doing. And it's just nice to kind of have someone else to look out for you, even safety wise. Some of the ships are a little tricky to get on. And so it's useful to go in a pair or a group.
Well, that question came up, actually, the unique challenges that you face as a woman going onto ships.
Yeah, it's definitely like I feel safe, but sometimes uncomfortable. And sometimes I feel like I'm not able to connect quite as well with the crew. The majority of the crew members that we visit are men. I run into a woman seafarer maybe, I don't know, once a month or so. I think it's less than 2% of seafarers are women, and most of that 2% is seafarers on passenger vessels versus the merchant
interesting.
vessels.
Yeah.
And so I'm wary also of, just my own safety, and sometimes have uncomfortable encounters where I get more attention than I want. But
Right.
usually people are very respectful, and that's been my experience so far.
One of the things we talked about earlier was the unique challenges that women seafarers face being on board a ship. And you and Deacon Joey told stories that were really compelling about how vulnerable seafarers are physically in the work that they do. And I wonder maybe if you could share a couple of stories about that.
Yeah. About female seafarers specifically, there was a recent study that was published where this organization did a lot of research and surveyed a lot of female seafarers about their experiences. And sexual assault is a reality that a lot of people face, and it's a big problem on the ships. And there's a whole power dynamic too of, if a woman is training as a cadet on her first ship, and then the captain and officers have a lot of authority and power on the ship. Sometimes she might not speak up about the problems. And there's also many layers to getting a job as a seafarer, and different agencies and the shipping company. And so oftentimes when seafarers encounter a problem, whether it's something like sexual assault or something like, other forms of harassment, or if they're just not, like their rights are not being met, such as their payment or the provisions on the ship, or just like the general conditions, working conditions on the ship, they're often hesitant to speak up because the company or the agency might not give them another contract, and they're often supporting their whole family back home, so they don't want to lose that job. And we're sometimes involved in welfare cases. So occasionally a crew will reach out to us and say, hey, we're encountering all these issues on board. We had a crew a couple months ago that called us and said, we're out of water. We've been catching drinking water from the rain. We've been fishing off the boat to get more food to eat. The officers are not allowing the crew to do laundry in order to save water. We're not being paid fairly, all these different issues. And so in cases like that, we will involve an organization called the ITF, and they have inspectors that will go on board the vessels, make sure that the ship is meeting the contract that they signed, and they have the authority to, detain the ship from leaving the port if there are issues, and have the Coast Guard come on board to inspect further. But oftentimes the seafarers will reach out to us first because they know we're a trusted group that they can talk to. And they often want to stay anonymous. So again, their agency won't fire them because they complained.
How do they contact you?
So we have a lot of different ways that seafarers can contact us. Every time I come in the morning, I'm checking like 3 different emails, 3 phones, 5 different apps. So a lot of them use WhatsApp or call us. We have a Facebook where they can message us. We have email. And then sometimes seafarers don't know how to get a hold of us, but when we visit their ship, we'll leave our contact information there.
Sarah's asking a little more about your role as the director of operations. Are you do you make arrangements to visit, to schedule ship visits, or sort of, so there's been a 2-part, so that, like, what exactly is your role as director of operations? And there was a question earlier, people are curious, like, what brought you out to not to California, but to the left coast, right? Like, what took you from tech to this work? So there's that. Anyway, so there's a curiosity about that as well. So if you want to answer both of those, that'd be great.
Yeah. For the first one, my role is still evolving because so Joey and I were both kind of interim directors while we looked for a new permanent executive director for 6 months, who we hired recently. And so my role is still evolving, but currently I visit a lot of the ships and kind of make sure that we're visiting all of them, whether it's me or Deacon Joey or our volunteers. I do a lot of the volunteer management and communicating with the volunteers. I do a lot of the accounting for the center and just kind of the general processes that we have. We do trip reports for our ship visits, and I make sure those are logged in a certain place, and work on some fundraising projects and hiring interns and a variety of other things. And as for the other question, I originally came out to Seattle as part of the Episcopal Service Corps. So I had been wanting to get into nonprofit work and saw this opportunity to do a service year. And I was very interested in the Seafarers Center, partly because I used to sail and love being on the water. And I was attracted to working at a faith-based nonprofit as well. And then it just seemed like a very dynamic environment with a variety of things going on. So after working behind a computer for a few years, that was really appealing to have work that's more direct. And, we leave the building multiple times a day to go various places. We're walking through the port, climbing ships, meeting people from all over the world. Every day is different. So I really enjoyed the variety there and just the people-focused nature of the work.
No, it makes sense. You guys, it sounds like when you talk about it, there feels like there's a similarity between jail chaplaincy, just because of the restricted movements of the crew and how long they spend in isolation, and how just their access to like the world on shore. But it feels like there's a parallel to hospital chaplaincy as well. And I'm wondering about your relationship as chaplains, as advocates, because it sounds a little like there's an advocacy role and how you balance that role. Like you've got to stay in the good graces of the security force, the security people that work there, and I imagine the captains, right? And then crew. So you've got a lot of different roles, it seems to me. Do they ever come into tension with one another?
That's where adaptability comes in, depending on who you're talking to. Whether you're talking to the officer or you're talking to the what we call the rating class of people, from Boston down to the ordinary seaman.
Wait, you call it the what class?
Rating. They're called the rating class. There are two categories: the officers class and the rating class, which starts with the bosun, which is the highest of the rating class, and then down to the AB, the able-bodied seaman, and the ordinary seaman. So depending on who you're talking to, when you're talking to the rating class category, then you're really concerned how they're doing with their life at sea. And that's where you find out whether there are welfare issues, whether there are issues with the officers, and those type of things. And then in terms of the officers, when you're talking with the officers, you're talking mostly about their policies on providing shore leave, because not all ships have the crew does not have shore leave. The captain has the authority to say nobody can come to shore, especially during the pandemic, which was understandable. But now they are being lax now, and they are made aware by Coast Guard that it's the right of crew to be able to come to shore.
Right.
So they're being more lax in providing shore leave to crew members. So it depends on what role you're playing, whether you're doing it for the good of the crew member, or making the officer aware of what is good for their crew. And
Is there ever a time where you have to provide spiritual support to the officers, or is that mostly negotiating access and advocating on behalf of the ranking members? Is that what you call it? Ranking members?
yeah, rating.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Rating.
In most cases, it's the officers who make the request. Let me backtrack. The crew can request the captain to have some sort of a service, and then the captain comes to us and say, "Hey, can you provide a mass for my crew?" And there was one notable instance in which a Croatian captain who was Orthodox said, "Hey, I got a request from the bosun to have mass on the ship, aboard the ship, and I wanted to give it to them as a gift because I'm offboarding the following week. So I'd like to give it to them as a gift because most of them were Catholics, most of them were Filipinos. So I made arrangements to have mass on board. I invited a priest to come on board, and we had mass. And after the mass, this Orthodox captain said, I could tell my crew is really, really happy having mass on board. If I could have this kind of a crew, like I've seen in just a short while, to be this happy, I will have mass in every ship that I'm in. So I said, wow, okay. So
That doesn't have, but it sounds like that's pretty unusual.
that is pretty unusual. In a lot of cases, the request that we get is for a memorial service, wherein we might have a death on the ship. In the past year, we have about 7 deaths, 4 of them suicides. And we have been asked to give memorial service, provide memorial service to the crew.
I was reading on your website that there's been a study done about depression and among crew members, and I'm wondering, is that a big part of your work? Like talking with crew members who are feeling isolated and depressed and maybe even suicidal?
It is in a sense. Part of the materials that we provide to them, we have a list of resources that they can call if they are experiencing, mental illness or suicidal feelings. We have a list of phone numbers that we provide to them because we're not really mental health professionals. So we decided to just make up a list of things that they can call and ask for help. But at the same time, we do kind of the preliminary work with them and make the advice to to make a call to these resources.
Julia, how many? Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that a lot of the time you can tell that the crew is just looking to talk to someone. We might sit in the ship office with one of the officers and they just start talking and keep talking. We've had a lot of conversations in the past year with crew members from Ukraine who are just telling us about how things are back home, how their family is, where their family has had to move, if their house is still okay, just what that whole experience has been like. And so you can really tell that some people just want to talk to someone, and, part of our chaplaincy is just listening to them and being a new face on the ship and someone who's there to hear their story. And so that's another thing that we often do.
How many volunteers do you have that help you go on ships and tend to the cruise?
We have a handful of regular volunteers who come maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks to visit ships, and they're like good to go on their own. We have a lot more volunteers who might come every so often and go on a ship visit with us. We also have a shuttle service for the cruise ships where we drive the crew members downtown. And we have maybe a dozen or 15 volunteers who are a part of that. We have a lot more volunteers who are active in other ways that are not visiting the ships. Especially in the winter, we have this Diddy Bag program where we put together care packages, and we try to bring a care package to every crew member in the month of December, and often it goes into January as well. So we have hundreds of people, mostly from different churches and other community groups, who knit hats to put in the bags and donate different toiletries, and then come together to help us stuff those bags so we can give them out. So I would say we have maybe 10 or 15 like core volunteers, and then we have a lot more people who are involved in different ways.
Sarah Kitch is asking about a recent challenge you have faced, and then a recent grace you have experienced, which sounds like the most Sarah Kitch of all Sarah Kitch questions I've ever heard. I'm sorry, but if maybe you could each talk about a recent challenge and then a recent grace.
I could go first. Let's see. A recent challenge. One thing that we encounter in the Port of Seattle is there are other groups who visit the ships, and kind of if you have a certain credential, you can get into the port and visit ships. And so oftentimes we'll run into a group of Jehovah's Witnesses that visit the ships and are usually trying to show videos during the cruise lunchtime. And it can be challenging to visit when that group is there and feel like we can't really talk to the crew because they're occupied. And just to navigate the differences in our ministries and how to go about that. I think a recent grace I've experienced, just yesterday, I went on a ship visit with our director, and the crew seemed interested in us going shopping for them. They were putting together a shopping list. And then we sat down and they said, "Oh, have you had lunch yet?" And they brought out this 5-course meal for us that had, all these different things. And, the cook's assistant was just bringing out, plate after plate. And
oh man,
it's always special to come on a ship and feel like you're about to serve the crew, but then to feel their hospitality back, and just to have good conversation with them as well.
That's a great story, actually. Well, for both reasons, Sharon was messaging me. One of the challenges we face in our chaplaincy program here is that in the spaces where volunteer chaplains show up, there are often groups that are very theologically motivated to be there. And it can be really hard to be in vulnerable spaces with other chaplains whose primary motivation is conversion and proselytizing. And it's really rough. So Sharon was like, "Oh my gosh, it's everywhere." It's hard. It's really hard. So I'm sorry, Deacon Joey, that question was for you too.
But my experience is that the seafarers really do not care how much you know until they know how much you care for them.
Oh, yeah.
So to me, when bad things do not happen, it is a win. It's grace, right? When they do happen, it's also a win for me because I have the opportunity to develop perseverance and depth, to become stronger and become a better person and be able to help the seafarers in their plight. So every opportunity for me is a grace. Everything is grace for me. Whether there may be some challenges that I might face, but I try to turn it into a grace, so to speak.
Well, I appreciate that, but it makes me feel curious, right? What you experience as most challenging in your role as a chaplain. I mean, it can be turned to grace, but I am curious about the first part.
Well, the most challenging really is to be yourself when you come and encounter a seafarer. How you would give them the support that they need as you go about engaging with them, because things are really unexpected all the time. There's no, when you go up there, it's always different. So to me, every encounter is a challenge on how you can support. Specifically, if you're looking for is knowing how a person is doing aboard the ship. How would you find that out? In what ways? So you kind of go through the engagement process and see how you are able to lift up the spirit of the seafarer.
When you guys have talked about, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish, Joy. I'm sorry.
Well, that's pretty much the challenge that I always face. But as I've said, you try to find ways in which you can lift them up, because that's the passion that we have in serving the seafarers.
I've been struck when you both have talked about your work, how unpredictable. I know you talk about adaptability, but I am a person who likes structure. I like to know what my day is going to involve, and I like to pace my day, right? Like, for 1 to 2, I'll do this, and then I'll work on that. And what you are describing is total chaos. Like, you have to be willing to get on a ship, and if someone needs a SIM card, or Julia, you told me about a story about the captain had a corrupted laptop and all the data was gone, and suddenly your whole day was trying to figure out how you're going to recover that corrupted data so the crew could be paid. Like, there's a kind of like willingness to let go of any expectations of what your day is going to look like. Is that fair? A fair characterization?
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
And are there, go ahead, finish.
I'm also a person who likes structure and a plan. And so often my plan is to be adaptable. Or like I plan out, okay, I'm going to visit this ship. Maybe I'll go to the next ship after if there's time.
Mm-hmm.
I need to run this work errand at Target, and maybe they'll ask me for a ride to Target. So I'll be prepared to run that. I have to be back for this meeting at this time, so I'll make sure to do that. But, just kind of being on point and being ready to pick up the phone when a crew calls and spend however much time on a ship when you get there. So it's definitely difficult, but, and it's difficult also to set your own limits of, I have to be somewhere at 5:00, so I'm not going to give this ride, or finding a balance of trying to serve the needs that come up and not overworking yourself.
Are most of the people you see, we're almost out of time, I'm aware, but are most of the people you see people you will never see again? So it's just this kind of intense interaction and then they're gone?
We see some people again. So a lot of, I would say maybe half of the ships that come into the port are regular ships. So they do a route maybe from, the Pacific over to a bunch of ports in Asia and come back to the West Coast. And so we might see them in a month and a half or 2 or 3 months again. But the crew could be different. So the crew is kind of staggered onboarding and offboarding. So every few months, there might be another group that leaves and another group that comes. But there's often some people who we see again. And so it is really meaningful when you get to see the same faces, and maybe even you see the same seafarer on a different ship who comes to Seattle again.
I would say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I may. It may sound idealistic, but we have been given incredible capacity to overcome difficult situations. And many times as a chaplain, the best thing to do is to listen to the seafarer, because that's what our ministry is all about, a ministry of presence, and be able to listen.
No, preach it, brother. That's it. That's all we have for anybody. No, it's true. We're out of time. And the 2 questions that have come up is there a way we don't have much of a seafaring ministry here in the Diocese of Los Angeles. So is there a way that we could be practically supportive to you, other than sending money, obviously, because that's what everybody needs? So is there, do you do drives for supplies, or is there a way to contact you if people wanted to do that?
Yeah, we're always collecting a range of things that we can give to seafarers, whether it's homemade, like hand knit hats, toiletries of any type. We collect clothing. We have a bunch of sweatshirts and t-shirts that we have in our center that seafarers can take for free. We take donations as well. We're mostly a donation-funded nonprofit. And we're also just trying to raise awareness about the issues that seafarers encounter. And Los Angeles is actually a huge port. And so there's not a big organized Seafarers Center there, but I know there's a lot of promise of maybe eventually having one. And so there might be opportunities in LA to serve the seafarers coming into the port as well.
So maybe what we can do as we close out, because we are at time, is Gabe, we can collect resources from you, either a link to your page where people could, if they want to send supplies, and maybe some contacts here in Los Angeles if people wanted to contact places to do ministry in the Port of Los Angeles, or at least to develop one if anyone was interested. So Gabe says he's going to send it all out in the recap. So thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
And Deacon Joey, for coming. I'm so grateful. Thank you for your work and your presence to these very vulnerable people on sea. I'm grateful for it.
Thank you
for having
All right.
us.
Of course. We'll see everybody next week for the Ask Me Anything. Well, not just me. Ask us all anything. All right. Till next week. Bye, friends.